Hey guys, in this video we're explaining about what is life cycle costing. Traditional management accounting control procedures have focused primarily on the manufacturing stage of a product's life cycle. Pre-manufacturing costs such as research and development and design and post-manufacturing abandonment and disposal costs are treated as period costs. Therefore, they are not incorporated in the product cost calculations, nor are they subject to the conventional management accounting control procedures. Life cycle costing estimates and accumulates costs over a product's entire life cycle in order to determine whether the profits earned during the manufacturing phase will cover the costs incurred during the pre- and post-manufacturing stages. There are a few advantages of life cycle costing. Firstly, identifying the costs incurred during the different stages of the product's life cycle provides an insight into understanding and managing the total costs incurred throughout its life cycle. In particular, life cycle costing helps management to understand the cost consequences of developing and making a product and to identify areas in which cost reduction efforts are likely to be most effective. Figure 21.1 illustrates a typical pattern of cost commitment and cost incurrence during the three stages of a product's life cycle, which are the planning and design stage, the manufacturing stage, and the service and abandonment stage. Committed or locked-in costs are those costs that have not been incurred but that will be incurred in the future on the basis of decisions that have already been made. Costs are incurred when a resource is used or sacrificed. Costing systems record costs only when they have been incurred. It is difficult to significantly alter costs after they have been committed. For example, the product design specifications determine a product's material and labor inputs and the production process. At this stage, costs become committed and broadly determine the future costs that will be incurred during the manufacturing stage. Based on figure 21.1, the upper cost curve shows the costs that are committed, which is the brown curve, while the lower curve, which is the blue curve, shows the costs that are incurred. The graph shows the wide divergence between the time when the costs are committed and the time when they are incurred. In contrast, the majority of costs are incurred at the manufacturing stage, but they have already become locked in at the planning and design stage and are difficult to change. Figure 21.1 shows that approximately 80% of the product's costs are committed during the planning and design stage. At this stage, product designers determine the product's design and the production process. It is obvious from figure 21.1 that cost management can be most effectively exercised during the planning and design stage and not at the manufacturing stage when the product design and process have already been determined and costs have been committed. At manufacturing stage, it focuses more on cost containment and cost management. An understanding of life cycle costs and how they are committed and incurred at different stages throughout a product's life cycle led to the emergence of target costing, a technique that focuses on managing costs during the product's planning and design phase. After watching previous video, now we can solve questions using the knowledge. What is the factors that need to be managed in order to maximize a product's return over the life cycle? The first factor is to design costs out of the product. It was stated earlier that around 80% of the product's costs were often incurred at the design and development stages of its life. Decisions made then commit the organization to incurring the cost at the later date because the design of the product determines the production method and the number of components. It is absolutely important so that design teams do not work in isolation but as part of a cross-functional team in order to minimize costs over the whole life cycle. The value engineering helps here. For example, Russian liquid-fuel rocket motors are intentionally designed to allow leak-free welding. It reduces costs by eliminating grinding and finishing operations. Next is to minimize the time to market. In a world where competitors watch each other keenly to see what new products will be launched, it is vital to get any new product into the marketplace as quickly as possible. The competitors will monitor each other closely so that they can launch rival products as soon as possible in order to maintain profitability. It is important so the first organization to launch its product as quickly as possible after the concept has been developed, so that it has as long as possible to establish the product in the market and to make a profit before competition increases. Often it is not so much cost that reduce profits as time wasted. Lastly is to maximize the length of the life cycle itself. Generally, the longer the life cycle, the greater the profit that will be generated, assuming that production ceases once the product goes into decline and becomes unprofitable. One way to maximize the life cycle is to get the product to market as quickly as possible, because this should maximize the time in which the product generates a profit. Another way of extending a product's life cycle is to find other users or markets for the product. Other product users may not be obvious when the product is still in its planning stage and need to be planned and managed later on. On the other hand, it may be possible to plan for a staggered entry into different markets at the planning stage. Many organizations stagger the launch of their products in different world markets in order to reduce costs, increase revenue, and prolong the overall life of the product. A current example is the way in which new films are released in the USA months before the UK launch. This is done to build up the enthusiasm for the film and to increase revenues overall. Other companies may not have the funds to launch worldwide at the same moment and may be forced to stagger it. Skimming the market is another way to prolong life and to maximize the revenue over a product's life. What is the difference between product life cycle and life cycle costing? The product life cycle is the period which begins with the initial product specification and ends with the withdrawal from the market of both the product and its support. It is characterized by defined stages including research, development, introduction, growth, maturity, decline, and abandonment. Life cycle costing is the profiling of costs over the life of a product, including the pre-production stage. Unlike traditional management accounting systems, which are based on financial years, life cycle costing tracks and accumulates the costs and revenues attributable to the product over the full life cycle, which may last for many years. Life cycle costing can also be applied to services, customers, and projects.
Those phases then can be brought forward into calculations. So these have been introduced recently, calculations on life cycle costing. So what we'll need to do is calculate our total cost over our life cycle. We can then allocate those costs to the units that we expect to produce, and that will give us an accurate cost for the product. Now, what we can do is once we've got that cost per unit, well then we can set the price per unit that we want to achieve to try and cover those costs. So let's see how this is done. Let's look at illustration 2 in your workbook. If you read through the illustration and either have a go and attempt it, or work through it with me. Illustration 2 gives us a breakdown of some information that the CEO has given us to say what should be charged for a product. So looking at it, we can see that he's basically used the first year's figures to calculate a cost per unit. So what we need to do is calculate the life cycle cost of the product and suggest an alternative price. So using the same method that we did in the illustration 1, let's calculate the life cycle cost. So the first cost we have here, research and development. Well, that's only in the development phase and it is 200. We then have marketing costs. We're given the marketing costs and they are 50 million in the introduction phase, 40 in growth, 20 in maturity, and 4 in decline. Lastly, we have the production costs. So in the introduction phase, we have production costs per unit of $4. We have production volume of 2 million. So $4 times 2 million gives 8 million as our production costs. In the growth phase, we have $3.50 times 5 million units of production, which is 17.5 million of costs. Maturity phase, we have $3 of a cost times 10 million of production is 30 million of costs. And in the decline phase, we have $3.20 as our cost per unit times 4 million produced gives us 12.8 million of costs. So that enables us to get a total. So for the development phase, we have 200. For the introduction phase, we have 50 plus 8 is 58 million. For growth, we have 40 plus 17.5, 57.5. Maturity, 20 plus 30 is 50. And decline, 4 plus 12.8 gives 16.8. So those are all our costs in each phase. We need to get a total product cost. So over the life cycle, we have the total costs, adding those all together, of 382.3 million. Now we need to see how many units we're going to produce in total. And we have total production of 2 million, 5 million, 10 million and 4 million. Adding those all up gives us 21 million. So what we need to do is allocate the total life cycle costs to each of those units. So the cost per unit will be the 382.3 divided by the 21, which is $18.20. And looking at the cost that the CEO had suggested of $54, we can see that that is a significant difference. And you can already start to see the difference that life cycle costing can do whenever we're looking at a product. Now that we've looked at the calculations for life cycle costings, we need to be able to discuss their implications. So there are some implications we need to understand for pricing. First of all, under traditional methods of costing. Well, under traditional methods of costing, we often write off research and development costs in the period in which they're incurred. So we look at where we've incurred our research and development costs and we write them off during that time. Now what that means is that we're writing off new research and development costs, i.e. research and development costs on new products, against the revenue that's being generated by the old products that are also through their introduction and into their growth phase. So we're generating the revenue from old products, but we're writing off the research and development costs from new products against that revenue. And what that means is that it can make the old products look less profitable because we're writing that research and development cost off against their revenue. Now that doesn't happen under life cycle costing. Under life cycle costing, rather than allocating the costs to a period of time, we allocate the costs to the product over its life cycle. The product is then priced up to cover the life cycle costs, and we can use that data to determine whether it's covering those costs or not. Also, when it comes to performance within the business, well, life cycle costing enables the business to recognize the fact that up to 90% of their costs will be in the research and development phase. So what that means is that they can focus on making that phase as short as possible and getting those products to market as quickly as possible so that they start to generate revenue. It also enables them to track costs through the life cycle of the product so they can see overall whether this product is profitable or not. It also enables the business to focus on early decisions, again by understanding that a lot of the costs are incurred at the research and development phase, so they can see that any of those decisions that are made early on in the product feed through into costs later on that they need to cover through revenue. So it enables the business to focus on those early decisions to make sure that they get them right. And ultimately, it can minimize the time that it takes to get the product to market because the business has an understanding of what the life cycle of the product is or is likely to be. So the advantages of this are that it gives more efficient resource allocation because you can allocate the resources to the products that are going to make the most profit over their life cycle. We track costs to products rather than to time, and that enables us again to understand whether the product is profitable or not. And it identifies that relationship between the research and development phase and the ultimate cost of the product. And that is crucial for the business to understand. So that was our lecture on life cycle costing. Make